Do we need motivation and inspiration? And some, of course, might now think, of course we need motivation, because when we're not motivated, we're not going to do anything. And when I'm not inspired, I don't have the right ideas. And yes, we have one advantage. When you're listening to this podcast in English, the English-speaking world is a lot more a lot more focused on motivation and inspiration. However, we now want to look at what does motivation and inspiration mean for your organization, and what are the upsides and downsides, and what is the real content, the substance, the scientific background of motivation and inspiration. Because, of course, we need inspiration for solving certain problems and motivation to show up at work in the morning, either at home or anywhere else or in your office. And we all know that there are certain people who call themselves motivational speakers. And these are the people who, many of them, not all of them, of course, many of them are part of the problem and were never and will never be part of the solution, because these people are the ones who use one-liners instead of any kind of substance. They will tell you something like, you can do everything as long as you believe in yourself, or persistence always wins. Just keep going and success will come. This is, of course, part of the toxic self-help industry. And the self-help industry is known for, first, there's always the next thing to buy, the next book, the next course, the next coaching, the next big whole event with singing, dancing, clapping, and no substance whatsoever. And that is of no use whatsoever. It never was. It never will be. And the biggest lie that these people, so-called motivational, inspirational speakers, the worst of them, use something which is called law of attraction. They take a theory from physics. They often talk about quantum, although they have neither a qualification nor a clue what quantum means, but it sounds so important. And that's why they like to use it. They say everything that happens to you in your situation is the result of your action, and therefore it's your fault. And that sounds quite smart when you don't do any background checks, ignore science, facts, and evidence, because it's not smart at all. When you say that everyone is in the situation and everything that happens to them is their fault, that is part of a so-called self-blame culture. You want that people blame themselves, think everyone is successful, you're not. So, of course, you have to buy my course, because I will tell you how to become successful. And many people of the motivational, inspirational speaking industry are from a privileged part of society, meaning they are white, male, straight, heterosexual, and cisgender. The group which is, even when you grow up poor, the most privileged one only by birthright. The least amount of discrimination happens to that group. So when you think you just have to believe in yourself and you just have to keep going and you keep going and you believe in yourself, but nothing positive happens in your life, you start to self-blame. The self-blame process will have a massive impact on your mental health. Of course, this is the fault of these motivational, inspirational speakers. And then the downward spiral begins. You spend all the money with them and you never get anywhere. And also when people say there's a law of attraction and anything that happens to you is your fault, it can be debunked very easily. So the next time you meet someone who tells you about the law of attraction and that they went to some event of some completely unsubstantiated Chumbawamba person, you simply ask them, when there is a law of attraction, which means everything that happens to you is your own fault, do you think that the Jewish community attracted the Holocaust and it's their fault? And suddenly becomes very, very silent. Or you ask, the building, you remember 9/11, people went to work and then a plane flew straight into their skyscraper. Do you think it's these people's fault that they attracted the plane, ending their lives, destroying thousands, tens of thousands of families? Do you think it's their fault? And suddenly it will be even more quiet. And of course, you then get some sort of blah, blah answer, which normally sounds like, oh, I don't like extremes, which doesn't work. When you have a question to answer, which is part of the scientific process, you don't like the question. It normally means you just found out your theory is complete nonsense and has been proven as not working. Or people say, yeah, there are exceptions, and the exceptions, of course, are determined by these motivational, inspirational speakers, which makes it completely arbitrary and far away from any kind of theory, proof, or evidence. And of course, if you want to go a bit extreme, by the way, there's a quite sarcastic and quite brutal meme on the internet, which says every person that died climbing Mount Everest once was really motivated. It's a bit brutal. It crosses the line. I agree. but it's true. And if you want to tell people how much nonsense is in this law of attraction, you can simply take a glass of water, which is probably on the table when you sit next to them, and you pour it straight into their face. And then you ask, so what did you do wrong that you got this glass of water poured in your face? So first warning, don't do that. Don't do that to anyone. That's not acceptable. However, they immediately now would see that this whole law of attraction thing is just part of a toxic self-help industry and the self-blame culture. Absolute and utter nonsense. The main issue with motivation and inspiration, and why it is often ridiculed, is there is it is very hard to make it measurable. It's hard to prove how effective and how efficient it is, because you can't put some sort of device in the room and say, oh, look, this department is on 83 out of 100 on motivation and 91 out of 100 on innovation, and creativity and inspiration actually is only 35. We need to do something about that. That's not possible. But still, we know that motivation and inspiration is important, because when you're not inspired, you probably don't get good solutions. And when you're not motivated, you don't turn up at work at all, or you are on a very low level of productivity. And now, of course, we have to look into, are there techniques where motivation and inspiration have delivered proof that they work? And yes, there are. Looking at mood boards. Mood boards often used in the creative industry, marketing, fashion, design. Mood boards where people just take snippets or pieces of paper, something they saw, a picture, a photograph, put it all together on a physical board, or meanwhile, of course, there are digital versions available as well. And all this together creates a certain impression, which then leads to the next piece of action they are going to implement. This is a technique, a creativity technique, which, of course, includes inspiration. And these mood boards work. There's a scientific evidence that these mood boards work. Because when you are inspired, there's a higher level of creativity, there's a higher level of innovation. People are able to solve problems, and they have a competency to solve these problems. Problem-solving competency, especially situative problem-solving competency. Is this important? If I now ask you, you're sitting there listening to this podcast, and I ask you, is it important for your innovation to be innovative, to be creative, and to be able to find new solutions to problems? Probably even very quickly find solutions to your clients' problems. You probably will say, yeah, of course. We need to have innovation. Otherwise, we will never have a new product. If we're not creative, it means we become outdated. Our competitors will pass us on the market, and we will suddenly be number 2, number 3, number 10, and then we will just go extinct. And if we can't solve problems, especially quickly, and have a creative and innovative approach to problem solving, then our customers will not be very happy. So here we see motivation, inspiration is important. And of course, now some people might ask, is there any kind of scientific backing for this? And yes, there is. Looking at the Greater Good Science Center, of course, now people can ask, what is the Greater Good Science Center? Could you please tell me what that is? Because anyone could just start something and call it Greater Good Science Center. So the Greater Good Science Center, led by Dr. Keltner and Emiliana Simon Thomas at the UC Berkeley in California, top 25 university, not the shabbiest place to do science. Satisfied? I hope so. They did research on motivation and inspiration, what motivates people, and what are the consequences of either having these moments. So, for example, what does a moment of being in awe include? How do you create these moments? What are the positive and negative consequences from it? Influences on motivation, productivity, employee turnover, et cetera, et cetera. There's a strong scientific evidence. However, people often ignore it, because you still have people in the organization who say, well, we are very science-driven. We have engineers, and the engineers, they do math and all that stuff, and math and science, and that leads the way in this organization. We have to see one aspect, and that is the core message of this whole podcast this time. Motivation and inspiration are a part, probably a central part, but meanwhile, many parts are of central importance. It's a part of how to run an organization sustainably, but it's not the whole. Because no part is the whole. You cannot say, oh, we only go on motivation and inspiration, because then you won't get any products done. If you do the extreme on the other side and you say, oh, it's only about math and science and physics and engineering and producing goods and logistics and supply chain, we don't need motivation, inspiration at all, then you will have a very high employee turnover, very low productivity. That will affect your whole product line, your profit margin, and you will go extinct very quickly, or bankrupt. That's the right word for it. So motivation and inspiration is a part of the whole, but you have to see on the one side, you have motivation and inspiration, including creativity, innovation, the ability to solve problems creatively and in a situative manner. But on the other side, of course, you have the content-driven way where people have strong evidence, numbers, KPIs, key performance indicators, for example, mathematical evidence or engineering, which are technical aspects. Maybe you heard of people who were excellent in doing IT, but then when they became the department leader in IT, no one suddenly wanted to work for them. Or people left the organization very quickly, or any new hire left after 6 months because they said, I can't work for this person. This is a typical example of when people think their part of the whole is the only part you have to care about. It is like these managers who say, oh, we only have to look at the numbers because the numbers are the only thing that counts here. If you have the numbers under control, everything else will fall in place. It won't, because motivation and inspiration are an important part of delivering excellent leadership. And it's not easy to be an excellent leader because otherwise anyone would be one. And we know that most leaders or many leaders are not doing a great job. So now you have to take a look into your organization. Maybe there's one department where the employee turnover is higher than anywhere else. And not only because it is common in the industry or it's common in that part. For example, sales normally has a slightly higher motivator, a slightly higher employee turnover. But then, of course, you can benchmark it and you can see, do others in our industry have the same issue? And when they do not, and you still have the same department where people call in sick a lot more, motivation and productivity is very low, the ideas are not really striking, clients do not really like what's happening there. So you see all the negative aspects seem to hoard in one part of the organization. And no matter how well qualified the person is on paper, having knowledge, of course, and expertise and experience is very important. There's no question about that. However, if you are unable to deliver motivation and inspiration, there is no chance that people want or will work for you. And by the way, when you now think, because I know there will be a certain share of listeners who say, in my organization, it's an owner-led organization. I say what the values are, and the values are hard work, delivering results, and we are driven by KPIs and numbers and reports. That's how we work. That's how we roll. And it's working well since 1822. Well, maybe when it's 1822, congratulations for being in business for 200 years. However, you wouldn't be the first organization that survived 200 years and didn't make it to 205. So be sure that don't ask questions like, why don't you show up for work? Why aren't you able to work longer? Stop asking questions which are only reflecting on your motivation. We are not in the position as employers or leaders to ask these questions anymore because markets have flipped, especially during the pandemic. People wondered, do I want to do what I do right now? And many came to the conclusion, no, I want to change jobs. Remember a couple of episodes ago at the beginning of the pandemic, where 2/3 in representative polls said that they are planning to change their job within the next 12 months, either within the organization or when the organization doesn't make an attractive offer, they are willing to change and go somewhere else. It is very important that you now see that you cannot say, I am either the person who is good with motivation or inspiration, or I am the person which is good with hard facts. Because as I mentioned before on other podcasts, KPIs, key performance indicators, hard and measurable facts are important. But the CSF, the critical success factors, these are soft factors. They are equally important. They are not a nice to have. They are not an add-on. They are not a value add if we can afford it. They are a must have. And that is where you have to question your organization. How well are you doing? How well are different departments doing? How well is the whole organization doing? And especially you have to ask yourself, how well are your leaders doing? Because they are the key part in either making the performance great or making the performance very poor. Of course, we have more than this podcast. When you go on expert.nb-networks.com, just put your email address in there. Every Wednesday, because I publish more than this podcast, every Wednesday morning you receive an email where everything I publish during that week is available for free. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. There's no advertising in there. Just go on expert.nb-networks.com, put your email address in there, and then you are always fully informed. Of course, when you now say, well, I have a couple of situations in my organization, however, they are very specific. Can I ask some questions, Niels? Of course you can. Just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and then we take it from there and we have a chat either on the phone or via Zoom or via email, whatever you prefer. Of course, when you say, hey, we need someone for training, speaking at events, coaching, consulting, or a mentoring project, or maybe you have something a bit of more long-term project and interim management, I'm happy to talk about that as well. However, at zero cost, just drop me an email so we can have a chat and see where your organization stands. And when you have questions, I'm always happy to help. Just drop me an email at nb@nb-networks.com. And now, the most important part is that you apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard in this episode, you will see the change that you want to see happening in your organization. I wish you all the best, transferring what you heard into the real world practice of your organizations. I'm always happy to help. And at the end of this episode, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.